Good morning, everybody. Today's webinar is entitled Leveraging Consumer Behaviour to Reduce Marketing Costs. This presentation illustrates how a focus on the science of consumer behaviour can reduce marketing costs and increase performance. My name's John Carlson. My background is in consumer behaviour and marketing strategy. The rationale behind this webinar are as follows. Advertising is not always cost effective, something most marketers know all too well. Advertising is almost always stealing. You steal the consumer's time, and more they're getting annoyed by that. Advertising is all too often guesswork. Creatives and planners alike guess what is and is not going to work. Fourthly, advertising is all too often lazy marketing. It's the easy, though expensive, option. That said, advertising is also, for many businesses, necessary. So this is the first of the 5 points I'd like to make. Marketing is about using strategy to manage consumer behaviour. Tesla, now one of the most valuable corporations in the world, has absolutely no advertising budget. Tesla does not advertise on a regular basis in order to drive inquiry or even to build its brand. It is a brand built without a reliance on advertising. It's a brand built on the clever marketing skills of the richest man in the world, a guy I consider to be about the world's best marketer, both in terms of the profitability of the business and the value of the business on the stock exchange. He has very cleverly positioned the business, very cleverly branded the business, very cleverly driven sales and margins and the overall performance of the business, along with its share price, without any reliance on advertising. This is another great brand that doesn't rely on advertising. Zara is the world's 5th largest fashion brand, and it has no advertising budget at all. Zara is not built on the back of advertising, despite the fact that it is one of the world's largest and most profitable brands. Here's a little story about this. In 2019, Myer, with its multi-million-dollar advertising budget, reported a $24 million EBIT. This was better than in any of the previous 5 years, and indeed was better than in any year since 2019. But it's still well below any commercially acceptable level of profitability. Zara, on the other hand, with no advertising budget, generated a profit in 2019 of $734 billion, and will have a profit in excess of $1 billion in 2021. Now, this is not to say that they're equivalent, absolutely equivalent businesses. Certainly, Zara is a much larger business, but it is a business that has been built without advertising, whereas Myer is a business built with an absolute reliance on advertising. And it shows that advertising is not always necessary to get the human behaviour you require to deliver the profits you require. In 2017-18, Procter & Gamble reduced its advertising budget in Europe by $750 million, and in the process sacked 50 advertising agencies. In the first quarter after the cut, sales increased by 3%, and they've continued to grow ever since. This is an example of a brand that's realised that advertising is not as fundamental to their profitability as many people might think. This is a photograph of David Ogilvy, who is reported to have said variously both of these statements, but which in actual fact said neither. Half my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. And 50% of all advertising is wasted. Thank God the client doesn't know which 50%. The fact of the matter, and here's another great example, 97% of consumers believe that texting whilst driving is deadly, but 38% of consumers regularly text whilst driving, and 47% of Gen Y regularly text whilst driving. This is despite millions and millions of dollars worth of advertising telling them not to mention the policing that's been involved in trying to reduce texting whilst driving. It is very difficult for advertising to effectively change human behaviour. Marketing is, or at least should be, all about doing one of four things: getting people to do something for the first time, the last time, more often or less often. We want them to shop at a shop for the first time. We want them to smoke a cigarette for the last time. We want them to go to the cricket more often, or we want them to drink alcohol less often. These are the four core behaviours that marketing should target and that marketers should focus on. And advertising is just one of many tools for creating these outcomes, and it is not always the most effective tool for creating these outcomes. But these outcomes need to be the focus of any effective marketing strategy. The tools are numerous in number, but they include the product, the way the product's branded, the consumer experience, pricing, access and distribution, the use of psychological triggers, and promotion. And you'll notice that these words are in different sizes, and it shows what I see as the relative importance of each of them. Branding is far and above the most powerful tool that most organisations have, closely followed by the product and then down to the customer experience. Promotion is one of the least important drivers of profitability for most businesses. And branding is, of course, all about adding tangible or perhaps intangible value to a product in order to create a brand. And this doesn't necessarily involve advertising, or at least a great deal of advertising. As a percentage of turnover, Apple has 90% smaller budget than Telstra. In other words, the advertising budget of Apple as a percentage of its turnover is 10% of the size of Telstra's budget as a percentage of its turnover. Apple has built a brand with a relatively low advertising budget, and not only that, it's built the world's largest and most valuable brand at about 300 billion without the overuse of advertising. Certainly they advertise, but they use many other tools to develop and to build and to make profitable their brand. Unlike Telstra, which tends to rely almost entirely on advertising to build its brand. Associated with this is my second point. Managing behaviour starts with psychology. It starts with getting into the brain of the consumer. Here's a couple of studies you might not be aware of. A few years ago in Copenhagen, the airport management got tired of the fact that men were urinating on the floor and splashing off the urinal. So they placed an image of a fly at the bottom of the urinal, and it reduced spillage by 50%. Now, they'd had signs in these urinals saying, "Please don't splash," and it had no effect on behaviour. But simply by putting the image of a fly at the bottom of the urinal, they exploited the fact that men have an inclination to aim. It's a natural human inclination. And they did aim, and spillage fell by 50%. Interestingly, the study was replicated in the United States, where one university put stickers of the logo of a competing university at the base of the urinal, and it had reduced splashing by 70%. So no advertising, simply by putting a small psychological trigger or nudge in place, behaviour changed. In spite of the fact that when there were signs telling people to do these things, it had no impact on behaviour. The trigger had a much bigger impact than advertising. Here's another interesting story. When Olay rebranded in the 1990s, Procter & Gamble tested 3 price points, or the equivalent thereof, in various parts of Europe. They tested $12.99, $15.99 and $18.99. Further, the test indicated that Olay would generate greater unit sales at $18.99 than either $12.99 or $15.99, and subsequent sales supported this. The point here is that the lowest price will not always maximise unit sales. It certainly doesn't maximise margins, but it doesn't even always maximise unit sales. A higher price can drive unit sales. Why? Because there are peculiar things happening in the minds of consumers. We are not rational beings, and we use price as a measure of quality. Another factor rarely taken into account by advertising agencies, and another factor that is not dependent on advertising. You can drive margin and the volume of sales simply by increasing the price without any change to the advertising. This is Daniel Kahneman, the only psychologist ever to win the Nobel Prize for economics. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which talks about processes that occur in the frontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, and processes that occur in the brainstem or limbic system, the automatic back part of the brain. And one of the things he found is that 80% of decision making, and this has been found in numerous studies since, occur in the brainstem or limbic system. And the implication of that is that there's absolutely no cognitive process going on. For there to be a cognitive process, the decision needs to be made in the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, the front part of the brain. And yet only 20% of decision making is made in the neocortex. This is one of the reasons, for example, why simply telling people not to text because it's dangerous doesn't work. They don't have an emotional connection. And when they text, it's a decision made without thought. It's an automatic decision. And most purchase decisions, 80% of purchase decisions, are automatic decisions, showing you just how important it is to understand how the human brain works before embarking on a marketing campaign. Here's another interesting set of studies. A study by 4 economists from various universities considered how much consumers are willing to pay for $100,000 worth of travel insurance cover for a trip to Thailand. But this occurred shortly after there had been a terrorist attack in Thailand. Participants in the study were offered 2 options. Option 1 was insurance cover for death caused by terrorism only. The second option was insurance cover for death by any cause, including terrorism, to the same value. Despite the fact that the second option is more inclusive and offers more value, the findings revealed that consumers were prepared to pay more for the death-only insurance, or the death by terrorism-only insurance, than they were for the inclusive insurance policy. In another study done by Daniel Kahneman, who I just spoke about, found that consumers in California were prepared to pay more for earthquake-only insurance than they were for general insurance, which included the same level of earthquake cover. In other words, here are 2 studies that show that people actively chose to buy something and pay more for something which had less value. This shows quite clearly the importance of understanding the psychology of the consumer before trying to manage the behaviour of the consumer. And this shows more. This again is drawn from some of Daniel Kahneman's work. There are 25 plus cognitive biases that affect the behaviour of consumers. The availability bias, the confirmation bias, the anchor bias, the bandwagon bias, the placebo bias, the blind spot bias, the sunk cost bias, the loss aversion bias, and the status quo bias. Let's look at a couple of those things and in more detail. The confirmation bias. This is where people believe things that confirm what they already believe. So when an anti-vaxxer reads a report which suggests that there's a problem with vaccinations, they are more inclined to believe that than research which shows there are no problems with vaccinations. The placebo bias, fantastic bias used in marketing by Nurofen when they had a product which, you know, for hip pain, for chest pain, for head pain, they had separate products for each of those kinds of pain. The product, by the way, was exactly the same, but the packaging said that the product was specific, and the research showed afterwards that the product worked better when it was said to target specific areas of the body, even when it didn't. Furthermore, there is now some debate as to whether the Australian government was right in banning them from doing that on the basis that the placebo effect may well be part of the treatment, not just part of the marketing. The sunk cost bias. You know, we buy a movie ticket for $30. We sit down in the movie and it's as boring as batshit. So we think, oh, but I paid $30 for it. I may as well sit through the rest of the movie, rather than going somewhere else and having a cup of coffee and using your time more constructively. You're thinking, I've spent the money, therefore I may as well sit through it. That's the sunk cost bias. The loss aversion bias, which is huge, which is that to lose $10 hurts twice as much as the pleasure of gaining $10. People are much more concerned about losing money than they are about making or even saving money. All of these kinds of biases affect the way humans behave, and very few of these biases are ever taken into account in advertising campaigns. Here's another couple of interesting ones dealing with pricing. $9.99 is cheaper than $10, and indeed $9.50. Now, we all look at $9.99 and we think that's just $10 less a cent, but the fact of the matter is it works better than $10. It sells more product, and what's more, it sells more product than $9.50. There is something in the human brain that makes $9.99 a very potent price point, or indeed any price which involves all nines. The brain sees $2,000 without a comma as being cheaper than $2,000 with a comma. The human brain says that it's better value to pay $125.33 than it is to pay either $126 or $125. The 33 cents suggests to people that whoever's pricing the product has thought it through and arrived at the best possible, the lowest possible price point at which they can still make a margin. Buying one and getting one free is always seen as being cheaper than half price. The word free has a dramatic effect on consumers, and despite the fact that these two offers are exactly the same, the first one is seen as cheaper. $310 in very small type is viewed by the human brain as cheaper than $310 in very large in a very large font. And when you walk into a store and it says was, and it's in tiny letters, and now in very big letters, that's the opposite of what it should be, and the opposite of the way the human brain works. The human brain thinks that the smaller the number, the better value that price is. These are all peculiarities about the way the human brain works, and what they show is that if we're going to maximize sales, if we're going to maximize performance, then we need to understand how the human brain works, And furthermore, they suggest that if we understand how the human brain works, we can bring down significantly the cost of marketing, or more specifically, advertising. The third point, branding is about culture, not clever, creative concepts. This is a really critical one. Now, I've seen lots of advertising for Myer. We've all seen lots of advertising for Myer. And it says great things about what to expect when you go to a Myer store. But when you go there, in my experience, you get average products at average prices with average displays and poor service. The product itself, the experience of going into these stores, doesn't support the messages being sent out through television, radio, online advertising. The experience is not a great experience, and as such, the brand doesn't exist. In fact, it's worse than that. They're seen as lying in advertising to get you into the store, and then when you get into the store, you feel disappointed and your chance of purchasing are significantly diminished. The brand reflects the culture of the organisation and how well that culture delivers a product which satisfies your needs and wants. And here's an example of a brand that understands just how important culture is in building a brand. There is no stronger marketing tool in Apple's arsenal than its stores. Now, I personally don't like Apple stores, but the target market loves them. And if you go into any of their stores anywhere in the world, they're full. Go into a Myer store anywhere in Australia and it's relatively empty. And it's not just the products they sell. It's about the culture that creates that product, that delivers the service, that greets the customers, that fixes the phones, that does all of those things. It's a culture that is reflected in the fact that they never ask for the business, the Apple paradox. Rather than, they never say to you, do you want to buy that? They just explain the product, they show the advantages of the product, they demonstrate the product, and they leave it to you to make a decision. That's part of their culture. They're not pushy. They're not trying to push product down your throat. And as a result of that, they actually sell more product. The displays are fantastic, set up by people who enjoy creating great displays. The products are well designed by people who love designing great products. The products are sold by people who enjoy working for Apple, understand the Apple culture, and reflect it in their behaviour. This is a brand built not on advertising, but built on culture. And culture is the most powerful driver of branding. This is an image of Tony Hsieh, the guy that started Zappos. Well, was one of the early CEOs of Zappos. Zappos when he started there, it had a turnover of about $1.2 million a year. That's in 1999. And in 2009, he sold the business to Amazon for $1.2 billion. Zappos is such a strong brand that they have a 75% repeat business rate. They are the biggest online shoe store in the world. In fact, they are the biggest shoe store in the world. They have been reported over recent years of selling up to 10,000 pairs of shoes a month in Australia. It is a phenomenal brand. And this is what Tony Hsieh says about building a great brand. At Zappos, we really view culture as our number one priority. We decided that if we get the culture right, most of the other stuff, like building a brand around delivering the best customer service, will take care of itself. The culture creates the brand. We're willing to give up short-term profits or revenue growth to make sure we have the best culture. In fact, after orientation, we offer people $2,000 not to work at Zappos. The ones who stay are the ones that are right for our culture. They only employ the people who can help them build their brand through an optimal culture. And this all leads to this model, which I'm happy to share with people down the track, or people who contact me. But step one in this brand culture continuum is develop the brand strategy. Then you create the culture, then you live the brand by bringing the culture to life, and then you communicate the brand. And the results of this are that you increase revenue, you increase margins, you increase support, you increase repeat business and referral, you increase staff productivity, increase staff longevity, increase standards of staff, and increase staff commitment. By treating brand and culture as a continuum, the brand defines what we want, the culture delivers what we want, and then gives us something to communicate if we decide to advertise. My fourth point that advertising agencies won't tell you: the cost-effective marketing starts with a great product. Now here's another one of the world's great retail brands, Costco. Again, a store I wouldn't go to save my life, but a brand that is massive throughout the world, one of the top 10 retailers in the world now, and they have no advertising budget. Certainly, they are among the world's best direct marketers, marketing to their existing database. But Costco has been built by delivering a product that its target market wants. Another example, Krispy Kreme, a business with no advertising budget. Eat one of these heart attacks in a box and you'll want to eat more. It is a product, it's a great product. I don't eat them because I don't want to put on that much weight, but it's a great product, and it's the product that has driven the success of Krispy Kreme, not advertising. They don't advertise. They don't have an advertising budget. This is an image of Scott Galloway, professor of marketing at New York University. At a recent conference in front of several hundred people, he asked the question, what do Apple and Google have in common? This was his answer: a fucking great product. The reason that Apple doesn't need to promote a lot, the reason Google doesn't need to promote a lot, is that every product in their arsenal is a great product. And a great product is one that the consumer wants. A great product is defined by the consumer, not by marketers. Creating a great product is about determining what the consumer wants in a product and then exceeding their expectations. It requires an understanding of the consumer and developing a product for the consumer. And if you think of any of the great brands of the world, the starting point for those great brands is a great product. And here's another example. Rolls-Royce, considered by many the best car in the world. No advertising budget. It is simply a great product. The fifth point. Customer experience is always more important than advertising. Here's another brand that's amazing. This is one of the world's biggest brands. Again, I don't like shopping in IKEA. I won't go to IKEA. But surveys show time and time again that consumers love the IKEA experience, at least their target market, love the consumer experience. Research around the world shows that people not only like shopping in IKEA, they like to sit in their dining room and eat their meatballs. Their meatballs, apparently, which is interesting for me, a vegetarian, one of their greatest in demand products. People love the experience of going to IKEA, of fossicking through this wide range of products, of having to go through this pathway that's pre-designed for them, and then of sitting down and having a meatball when it's after. They love the customer experience. Again, Zappos, as I talked about before, 75% repeat business. People love the experience of shopping with Zappos. It's a great customer experience. Therefore, people will shop there more and more. Businesses need to focus on lifetime value. Lifetime value is not advertising-driven sales, but it is the key to maximizing profitability. Lifetime value is all about the customer experience, including the product, not the advertising. And let's consider some numbers around this. The probability of selling to an existing customer is 60 to 70%, whilst the probability of selling to a new customer is 5 to 20%. In other words, once we've established a relationship and the customer experience is excellent, the chance of them buying again is more than 10 times, 12 times higher than a first-time customer. 92% of customers respond positively to recommendations from friends and relatives. You don't get recommendations from people who haven't enjoyed the customer experience. If you want to maximize referrals, maximize recommendations, you have to create a customer experience where people are prepared to make those recommendations. 52% of businesses cite repeat business as the primary driver of profitability. More and more businesses are realizing that repeat customers are worth much more to them than existing customers, and customers only repeat if they've had a good customer experience. 45% of businesses cite new customers as the primary driver of profitability, and again, a customer is only going to come back if they've had a good customer experience. Repeat customers spend 67% more in months 31 to 33 of a relationship than in months 0 to 6. Again, showing if you deliver a customer experience, they'll hang around and spend more. Repeat customers spend 300 times more than first-time customers. Again, if you offer a good customer experience, they'll come back and they'll spend more. Referred customers are 4 times more likely to purchase. Referred customers have 37% higher retention rates. Referred customers spend 25% more than unreferred customers, and referred customers cost almost nothing to acquire. But you don't get referred customers, you don't get repeat business customers unless the customer experience it meets or exceeds customer expectations. And this shows quite clearly that the customer experience is every bit as important, and almost certainly significantly more important, than the advertising that makes them a first-time customer. Question: what is your strategy to maximize conversion rates, the average sale per customer, margins, repeat business rates, and referral rates? And is it documented and understood by all of your staff? Without such a strategy, you are not even maximizing the return on your investment in advertising, let alone the return on your investment on marketing and the business more broadly. These strategies need to be documented because these strategies drive the lifetime value of a customer, and they make every dollar spent on advertising, every dollar spent on getting customers through the door to generate a much, much higher return. In closing, I want to just talk briefly about Mark Cuban, one of the more successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. People ring him on a regular basis seeking funding for their projects. And he asks them 3 questions. He asks them to demonstrate that they are targeting the smallest possible sustainable market. The smallest possible sustainable market is all about the smallest market you can target and still hit profit targets. The principle there is the smaller the market, the better you're able to understand the market, understand their psychology, tailor your product, tailor your branding, and tailor your marketing more generally to address the needs of that market and exceed their expectations. Secondly, he asks them, what's your strategic competitive advantage? What sets you apart in a tangible manner, preferably, from your competitors? And only when he's determined, and if you don't have a strategic competitive advantage, he won't invest in your business, because there is an inverse relationship between the strength of your strategic competitive advantage and the amount of money you need to spend on advertising. The clearer and more distinct your point of difference, the lower the requirement for advertising. And finally, can you demonstrate that you understand that the customer owns your ass? That it is the customer that you need to understand, that you need to develop your product, your brand, your customer experience to address. And if you take nothing else away from this webinar, think about this. Target the smallest possible sustainable market. Develop a clear and tangible strategic competitive advantage, and then understand your customer so well that you can develop the product, the brand, and the customer experience they're looking for in a way that minimises your reliance on advertising. I'm not suggesting for a minute that advertising is entirely unnecessary. It is necessary. But much of advertising is wasted because we're not doing these other things, because we don't understand the psychology of the target audience. And much of this advertising is wasted because if we'd done these things that reflect our understanding of the consumer, it wouldn't be necessary. It may even be good advertising, but it wouldn't be necessary if we first looked at psychological triggers, first looked at developing a product that meets and exceeds expectations, firstly developed a product experience that exceeds expectations, and then develop a brand which the consumer sees as optimal, not just the advertising agency sees as optimal. There are many more of these points that advertising agencies are not inclined to tell you, and I'm happy to discuss them with anyone who might be interested. But for now, thanks for listening.